Yes, here we go. Whoop, whoop. We're live. This whole Corona crisis thing has learned me a couple new skills in streaming, learning streaming software. So we're happy to be here. I'd like to welcome you to our first live stream, live from the BaseFlow office in Amersfoort. Well, it's live, you know, and I'd like to quote Murphy's Law saying that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Probably something will go wrong at some point. Please bear with us. We'll try to fix anything if anything goes wrong. I'd like to point you to the settings of the YouTube. You can change the bitrate of the flow of the stream. So put it up to 1080p. To have like a detailed view on the fonts and whatever. We're at BaseFlow, so I'd like to switch to René. He's with us. René is working at BaseFlow, so well, can you say something about BaseFlow, René?
Yeah, so as Johan already said, I'm René and I work at BaseFlow. We are at the moment at the Amersfoort office, but we also have an office in Enschede. We are an innovation company, and we mainly make Flutter apps at the moment, but also backends and Xamarin apps. Yeah, that's mostly it. We are very well known at the moment for our Flutter packages. Cache network image and geolocator are our most used packages, but we have many more, and are also still developing many more packages. So that's
Cool. And how many people are working at BaseFlow?
At the moment about 25, but we are growing fast, so it can be more any moment.
And everyone's a Flutter developer, or?
No, as I already said, partly Flutter, partly backend, and partly Xamarin. But for example, I do backend and Flutter, so we also combine technologies in people.
Oh, great. Thanks for having us. We had a nice meal just before, and let's get on with the program. So we're Flutter Netherlands. We've just started, basically. We had our first, or we want to have our first meetup in April on site, but then Corona happened. We kind of I'd say it took some time to finally decide to go live online via streams, but hopefully we can meet, you know, in the fall again, in real life. So again, we're a meetup group, so we really think that, you know, meeting each other once in a while on location, learn from each other, and just, you know, have a beer in hand and chat. That works really well. Also because there are a lot of, you know, 1-2 person Flutter teams out there, and everybody can use some help now and then. We're also on Slack, so if you really, well, have questions or just like to hang out with other Flutter developers in the Netherlands, you can join our Slack group. There's a QR code there and also a link. We'll show it again later. I think it's great. It's working great, and well, like I said, we can find each other there. Last time we said we wanted to do another live stream in August about app architecture and project organization, but we don't have speakers yet. So if you have a vision or a view of how to orchestrate your Flutter project or your folder structure, or if you work with packages and you'd like to say something about that, we really appreciate it if you could reach out to us and do a similar format as we do this evening, and show us or share us a bit about your experience with app architecture. So that's in September. So last month we had like a Google Meet, and one of you also mentioned, you know, can we do that again? Because there's more interaction. So we plan to do that in August. And details can be found on meetup.com. Just go to that URL or search for Flutter Netherlands and you'll find us. And one of the big things that people liked very much was the Flutter flashlight section. So there basically you could showcase your app, which you made with Flutter, or if you created a package, or if you're just enthusiastic about something and you like to share it. I think, well, that's very good to see that, you know, other projects and people, how they use Flutter. So again, if you like to pitch your app in the August meetup, so Google Meet again, please reach out to us again via email or via Slack. Then on with the program. We have a tight schedule. We thought we didn't want to do like a 2-hour session, so or live stream. So we came up with this short sessions, 12 minutes. We'll put the speakers on the clock, so we'll time them. We'll just cut them off at 12 minutes, and then the message has to have come across. First is Maurits. He's going to talk about BLoC. Next is Peter Otte. He's going to talk about Redux, and then Peter van Loon is going to talk about whole something else, custom state management alternative. At the end of each talk, we'll have like a short couple minutes to answer some questions. Keep in mind that there's a delay in when we record this and what you see. It's about 20-30 seconds maybe. So if you have a question, please ask it quickly. I'll try to moderate the questions and pick a couple for the speakers to answer. And at the end, we'll have like a general discussion about all stage management alternatives. So again, if you want to share something or want to ask something, again, do it in the YouTube live chat. There's a chat box on your right, there. So use that. I'll be moderating that and monitoring that. So it's on to our first presenter, and that's Maurits. So Maurits, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Johan. Hello, everybody. I'm Maurits van Beuskom. I work at Baseflow, colleague of René. And I'm going to talk about state management with BLoC today and give you a short introduction so you know the basics and maybe help you decide if it fits your needs, or maybe you would rather go with one of the others, which I think is all good. Okay, let me first start off with a small overview of what we believe in at Baseflow. We strongly believe in the clean architecture principle, which is all about separation of concerns, where you want to focus on your business rules. That's the yellow and the red circle. And then you want to defer thinking about UI and database management as long as possible, because your real business is in the business rules. So the clean architecture works with the circles, where they strongly follow the dependency rule, which means that you can only communicate inward and you cannot communicate outward. And like I said, you defer as long as possible, talking to a database of external interfaces, etc. Okay, so nice. BLoC can help with that. So once we have our use cases or business logic ready, it's finally time to think about how are we going to display this information to our consumers. We decided, for example, we use Flutter, of course. It's the only real option out there, if you ask me. Sorry if I offend somebody. So we can use BLoC to help us with the separation of the UI and our use case, our business logic. So BLoC is very useful because it's responsible of the state, so there's no longer state in our UI. It uses plain Dart objects, so it's very simple. And yeah, one thing to know, I hear a lot that BLoC is referred to as an architecture, but yeah, BLoC is just a framework or a component within the whole architecture. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, but why BLoC? What's the advantages? Well, first of all, I mentioned already, BLoC decouples your UI from your business logic. And it does that, in my opinion, in a very nice way that allows you to change your business logic without affecting your UI or barely affecting your UI. On the other hand, you can freely change your UI without having to go into your business logic and update some relationships or things like that. So yeah, that's really nice. It makes it really easy to test your business logic. It's a plain Dart, so you can just use Dart unit tests to go through the flow, fire events, and catch state changes, and validate them. And because now our UI is also separated from state, it will make it easier to test the UI. And we don't have to worry about the state of the application, and we can just go focus on the UI elements. Second, BLoC utilizes streams, which in this case allows for precise widget tree updates, where the default solution of Flutter with the set state completely updates your widget tree. In BLoC, you can pick which elements in your widget or in your widget tree need to be updated when the state changes, which makes it very efficient. And it also adds support for reactive programming because BLoC relies heavily on streams, and that automatically makes your app very reactive. And last but definitely not least, it's ideal for Flutter and Angular Dart development because of the great libraries developed by Felix Angelov, which I strongly recommend checking out. The website mentioned here has great documentation and in-depth examples on more complex applications. So communication with BLoC can be shown like this schema. The BLoC is the center part. It has a sink which receives incoming events, and on the other side is a stream where it emits state changes. And of course, there's the use case that needs to do the real number crunching and execute your business logic. So imagine in your widget you have a floating action button, you press the button, and then you will send an event to the BLoC. BLoC will catch that event, determine what use case to execute, catch the result from the use case, and puts it back on the stream where the widget is listening for an update, and immediately will update the screen. No refresh or other things needed. Okay, nice theoretically, but let's now show the code. Actually, I've implemented a very simple alternative to the counter app, the default app from Flutter, but this time I will use BLoC. You can see on the right side of the screen, it looks exactly the same as the default app. Of course, I updated the colors to match our BaseFlow house colors. Okay, so before we begin, we need to get hold of our BLoC. In this case, we use a provider pattern where we have registered our BLoC earlier, and we can just ask the provider, hey, provider, give me the incrementer BLoC, which will help me keep track of state and where I can send my events to. And then in the second outline block, you will see a stream builder, which is where we subscribe to the out counter. We set the initial data to 0, and every time an event comes in, we output the data to in a text widget. And then the last part is our floating action button, where on our on-press event, we will just add an event to the signal the incrementer counter, the BLoC, with an event, in this case nil, because there's always one event that's just increment, which we will see now. So this is our BLoC class. It's very simple. It implements BLoC, which is an abstract class that only forces us to implement the dispose method, because we need to dispose or close our streams. So the main logic here happens in the two outlined parts. The first one is where we listen to the stream of incoming events. Every time an event comes in, we call the handle action method. And then the handle action method executes our use case, in this case update the counter plus plus, and add the new value to the output stream. And there's a few guidelines that the creators of BLoC came up with to keep things simple and straightforward. So a BLoC class should always have simple input and output. And in this case, it should actually always be a sink and a stream. Sink for input, stream for output. Dependencies into the BLoC always need to be injected and should be platform agnostic, so no platform specific code. And platform branching is forbidden inside the BLoC, so there's no if platform is iOS, then do this, else do that. And then the last set of guidelines, they go for the widgets or for the UI. So each big enough UI component has its own corresponding BLoC class where it can communicate with, subscribes to the state updates. And UI components send input as is, so they don't do any formatting logic, since that is business logic. We want the business logic to be moved out into our use case. In the same way it goes for the output. So the UI tries not to format or do anything with the output. Again, this is business logic and should be moved away to make it testable. And all branching in our widget tree should be based on a simple BLoC Boolean output. So if you want to show a loading state, it should be a simple request to the BLoC, am I loading, yes or no. We should not have concatenation of Boolean events, or different, because that again is business logic and doesn't belong in our UI. Keep reading. Okay, thank you very much for listening and bearing with me. You can reach me on my Twitter or send me an email. Visit our GitHub site. You will also find full code of the demo application I showed you on the link displayed here. And that's it. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, applause. I'm always being the first, always hard to be the first. We got a couple questions from the live stream, basically all from Rogier, so we'll answer your questions first. So Rogier says, do you need to use the excellent packages? I set up BLoC before that package existed, and I do not see the need to change it into the BLoC package.
No, that's absolutely not necessary. The code I just showed you is fully sketched, no packages necessary, but it means you need to do some extra maintenance. Once it's set up, and like you said, you already have it set up, you probably won't change that much anymore, so leave it as it is. But if you're new to the BLoC pattern, then I would recommend having at least a look at the packages, even if it's just for the great examples, to learn from.
Okay, then a question from me. So, do you always does the state object, how do you say it, or if a block sends out state, does it need to contain that data, or does the data reside on the block itself, or can you pick and choose, or?
No, not necessarily. Usually you keep the data stored in your use case. That one knows how to work with the data, how to validate the data, how to keep it around. The block will at least keep the last state around since it's in the stream, and it will be there, so you can request it again if necessary. But no, it's not per se necessary to keep the state around in your block and put whole state management there.
Okay, thank you, Rogier. I cannot check if that answers your question because there's like a minute delay for our answer question round. So another one from Rogier. Should the block always work with sinks for input? Couldn't you just trigger a regular method on that block?
Well, you can, but then the problem becomes that you get a lot of different methods inside your block, and then it's easy to lose track of the single responsibility principle, and your block starts doing more and more and more, which it actually should not be doing. So it's easier to have a sink that just accepts like a base class for your expected events, and then that way make sure that your class doesn't go out of what it's intended to do.
Okay, cool. Anybody else in the room? Question for Maurits? Otherwise, we'll continue. Thank you, Maurits.
Welcome. Thanks for the questions.
Okay, we'll continue with.
Yes, so as Johan already said, I'm Peter. Hi. I work at Signify as a Flutter developer on the Philips Hue apps. And if you want to come in contact with me, there's a link to my LinkedIn page at the bottom left. And I will talk about state management with Redux. So first of all, what is Redux? Well, Redux is a state management library, of course, but it pronounces itself as a predictable state container. And this is because it's basically a reducing function, hence the name. And that is something that comes from functional programming. It's a concept. Redux is inspired by Flux from Facebook, so it has been around for some years. It's most commonly known from the JavaScript world, so it's coming from React or React Native or the Angular stuff. But it's now gaining a lot more momentum, a lot more fame with Flutter. So why Redux? Well, state management can be hard these days. Apps are becoming bigger and bigger, and more difficult, more screens, more stuff happening. You're fetching data, you're saving data, you're caching stuff. It all happens asynchronously. So you need a good state management solution in order to keep everything in track. And in all these hard things, two concepts are mixed, which is mutation and asynchronicity. And that's hard for people to wrap their heads around, basically. It's basically like a metaphor I saw, which is the Coke and Mentos metaphor. So they are good separately, but if you mix them together, it will become a hassle. So Redux is basically a solution to approach this. It adds some restrictions on top of your state management solution to make all situations predictable. And it does that by applying three principles. So principle one is there's a single source of truth. Number two is state is read-only. And number three is changes are made with pure functions. And I will go into these in more detail now.
So the first one, the single source of truth, is basically that the state of the whole application is stored in one object or one object tree in a single store. So as you can see in the code example here on the left, you will see that app state is basically a simple Dart class, which has one enum foobar of type foobar, which has 3 enum values. And you can create an initial app state by calling the constructor, which will set foobar to not determined. And this is what we call the store in the Redux pattern. Principle number 2 is state is read-only. And this means that the only way to change the state is to emit an action. And that action is describing what is actually happening. And this is basically what we also call dispatching. So we dispatch an action onto the Redux store. And that action could be something that the user triggered, so it could be a tap on the screen, or something happened to the app, or something happened to the Wi-Fi connection, whatever. And on the right, you will see an example in code of what an action looks like. It's also a simple Dart class. And it can also be, of course, an action can also have some fields. So it could be describing something which describes the action, what happened, and what regard. Now, the third principle, changes are made with per functions. This is to specify that the state tree is transformed by actions. And for that, you write per reducers. And that's the functional data paradigm that comes into. Basically means that a reducer takes your current app state and then the action that happened, and then combine those two together to a new app state. And the important thing to mention here is that it's a new app state. So you're not changing, you're not mutating your current app state. You're actually grabbing the existing app state and the action, and together with that, making a new app state. And you can create reducers. Reducers are simply a function. You can create multiple of them while your app is rolling, if that's needed. So here in the code example on the left, you will see a small example of a reducer, which basically indeed grabs the state, grabs an action. That action can be any action which is in your app. And then in the code itself, you will see that if that action is the foobar retrieved action, it will return a new state object with a changed foobar. So in a diagram, it looks like this. So the UI on the bottom is purely based on everything that's in the App Store. So your actually current state of the app. And something that the user does or something that happens on the system will trigger an action, which will go to the reducer, which will then create a new app state, which will end up in the store. So what about side effects or asynchronous actions then? Well, middleware is the rescue to that. So middleware is basically a layer between the actions that get dispatched to the store, but the middleware catches those actions before they reach the reducer. And in that way, you can produce side effects. For example, logging to analytics, that a user pressed the button. You can do that in a middleware before the action of that button actually reaches the reducer. You can also decide to change the action or maybe dispatch additional actions that need to happen. Another example of good middleware usage in Redux is asynchronous stuff. So it could be that you have an action which determines that you need to fetch something from an API or backend. And then in your middleware, you can dispatch the loading started action, which will then change the state of your app to loading. The app will display that. And then the middleware itself will perform the API call or the action, the asynchronous action. And then when it's done, the middleware can dispatch the loading done, including the result of that action. And then your UI would change again. And then in a diagram, it would look this way. So the middleware is between the action and reducer. So yeah, how to use Redux with Flutter. The Flutter Redux, which will provide a few widgets to couple your Redux store to Flutter. Two of them are basically important if you use this package, which is the store provider, which will provide. Okay.
Can you go to the next slide or previous slide?
Yes.
Relax,
There's something wrong with the screen here. That's right. So just enough time to call it in.
Oh.
Sorry guys.
Maybe it's a connection.
Can you stop screen share and then start screen sharing? I always look like mad when I'm concentrated, so sorry about that. Yeah, that's better. So, share the screen again. I think we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got stuck on this slide. Okay. Yeah. So I was saying that in order to use Redux and Flutter together, there's a Redux package available on PubDev. Read the documentation because it has some good examples and some good explanations as well. It also links to the Flutter Redux package, which is another package which will add some Flutter widgets, which will be easy for you to hook your Redux store to your Flutter widget tree. One of them is the store provider. That one will provide your store to the sentence in your widget tree. And one of them is the store connector, which will then grab the store provider from higher in the widget tree, so you can use it to dispatch actions or fetch the state. But I will show you a small example of that. Again with the counter app, because I think that's familiar for everybody who's doing Flutter. We started with Flutter. The counter app, just for explanation, if you press the small plus button at the bottom right, the fat button, it will use Flutter's mechanism of set state to increment the counter. But in this example, I will use Redux to do that. So first thing you would need to do is edit your pubspec YAML file and add Redux and Flutter Redux there. Then make sure you do a pubget to fetch those. And as you can see on the left side, I added 3 small files for the app state itself, and the actions, and the reducer. If you look at the app state, it's a simple Dart class basically, called counter app state. It holds one field, the count itself, and you create an initial state which sets the counts to 0. Then if you look to the actions, we have an increment counter action, which will increment the counter, of course, by a given amount, and the amount defaults to 1 in this case. And then we have the reducer, and this reducer grabs the app state, the counter app state, and the action itself, and then produces a new app state. And here you will see that it uses the count from the given app state and the amount of the action together to create a new app state with the given count. So in your widget, so if you start your Flutter app, you will first create the Redux store itself. You will see that in line 10 on the top. There you give the reducer to the store. You can also give an array of reducers, so multiple reducers, and you give the initial state. And then in your widget tree, high in the top, you can have the store provider where you will provide this Redux store. And that way, lower in your widget tree, you can use the store connector. Here I'm fetching the counter app state and then basically converting that to a string, which is the actual count that I want to show on the display. So with the converter and the builder fields, you can construct that solution. And then even lower in the widget tree for the floating action button, you can have another store connector, which then converts the counter app state and uses dispatch action on that to actually dispatch the increment counter action. Another way to use Redux with Flutter, but then without the Flutter Redux package, is what we actually do at Signify for the Philips Hue apps. There we use the functional data package. This will make sure that we have immutable state objects for our Redux app store. And this also adds some easy copy width functions, which will be very handy in reducers, where you want to create new instances of your state, but without getting over the data from the actual state. With the copy width function, that's easy. We also use the plain optional package to make sure that we don't introduce any nulls into our app state. Plain optional is basically simple wrapper around nullability. And then the provider package, I think it's also familiar to maybe all of you. We use that for 3 simple things. We want to provide a way to dispatch the actions. So we're not providing the full store. we're only providing a way to dispatch. We're also providing subparts of the state, so not the full state, to every widget tree possible. And then we use the selector from the provider package to convert that given app state to a view model. And then we use that to build the screen. There are some more interesting topics, but I see I'm running out of time. But those are combining reducers, handling async with middlewares, or even using multiple middlewares. And there are some packages for Redux also available on PubDev already. But make sure to check the docs. I think that's it. So thank you for listening. I'm open for any questions now.
Yes, well, we got a couple of questions, so that's good. Basically, I'm on the back right of Peter, so he might look around, you know, if he doesn't understand the question, or doesn't read it, if I don't pronounce it well. So the first one is from Stefan, good old friend Stefan. Do you mix on purpose state management solutions in your code base, Peter? If yes, which and when do you choose one over the other?
Well, I don't see provider as a state management package. So in that way, I'm not combining state management packages. I see provider as more of a dependency injection thing to make sure that we actually provide state and dispatch functionality to lower ends in the widget tree. I wouldn't see any big reason to combine state management libraries, for example, BLoC and Redux in one app. It might make things more difficult than you would want them to be.
Yeah, and also maybe keep it consistent in your code base, right? So yeah, easy for everybody. If you know one tool, maybe then it's good. So another question from Sander: can you rebuild only a part of the screen with Redux, or is it always the whole screen with an extra V because my V key is broken?
Well, if you use the store connector, then it will only rebuild that part of the tree. And when we are using the provider package, of course, it will only, the selector of the provider package, it will only rebuild that part of the tree. So indeed, you can, depending on where you provide and get the provider, it will only build the subparts of the widget tree, which is the best solution, of course.
Okay, cool, thanks. Dennis is asking, what is the scope of the reducer? One reducer per screen, or just like the store, you have one big reducer?
So when you start with Redux and you start with a new app, you will end up with one reducer. But then it's quite easy to go to multiple reducers and then use that in the store. So I'm not saying you should have one reducer per screen. It might be multiple even. It might be some reducers per actions or per functionality of the app, or maybe per packages if you split your app into multiple packages. But it's with Redux, it's very easy to have multiple reducers, multiple middlewares set up, so that's no issue. I would go for, I prefer more reducers than only one reducer.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm doing multiple things here. I'm muting, unmuting my phone, then have to go to the next slide. So the next is from Christoph. What middleware do you use for async actions?
I don't use any of the packages I mentioned. We just do async await stuff in our middleware. That also works.
Okay. We
hope that answers the question. Maybe it's too simple of an answer, but
yeah, it's hard to
just go to Slack and then we can have a discussion.
Yes, yeah, good one. So Christoph, join Slack and continue the discussion with Peter there. So I think this is the last one from Milo. This Redux code looks exactly the same as my BLoC code. I assume the principle is the same. What are the differences?
So I think BLoC uses streams it uses streams, and for Redux that's not the case. So for example, in Redux the reduces, if you have an if-else tree with if it's this action then do that, or if it's that action then do that, that's all synchronous stuff. So you can actually decide the order in which your state gets reduced. I think that's a difference, but then again, there might be a lot of similarities indeed. Yeah.
Okay, I think that was the last question. Yes, look at that. How are we doing on time? 8:15. Well, we definitely have 12 minutes left for Peter van Loon. He's going to talk about a state management alternative, because yes, You can use packages. There are many packages out there, state management solutions, but you can also, look at what Flutter and Dart have to, have in the SDK for themselves. So, Peter, are you ready?
Ready?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Well, hello, I'm Peter van Loon. I work at Wolfpack IT in Eindhoven as a Flutter developer. And next to that, I am also a graduate student at the Eindhoven University of Technology. I'm going to talk a bit about my own solution for state management and also a bit why I built it. Well, first of all, there exist a lot of different ones. The topmost ones we already saw today, and provider, which also the other piece already mentioned, is kinda a solution, but kinda not, which I agree on. And then we have one more popular one, which is MobX, or at least as far as I know, it's fairly popular. But there are actually a lot more. I saw a list lately that was like 30 packages or something that exist. And there's even one that's quite similar to mine, I found out. So why would I build my own? Well, it's all about feeling. It's just when I looked at the packages that were available at the time, I didn't quite like any of them basically. They either have too much boilerplate code, or the composability is maybe not exactly how I want it. And sometimes it's hard to see what impact performance in what way. And that also ties into the last point, you need to understand your own code. And with using those packages, it can be quite hard, I think. And actually, building your own isn't hard at all. So what do I actually want for my solution? Well, the most important things are that views can be independent, because you don't want one view having a tight relationship to another, because maybe you want to remove one and then you have to refactor the other one as well. You don't want that. And then fine-grained performance control is something I really like, because my master topic is also embedded systems, so that's quite low level, and I just, when it's possible, I like to be able to control it as fine-grained as I can. And in Flutter, that's definitely possible, although not as fine-grained as in embedded systems, of course. And then also, we want to minimize boilerplate. I want to minimize the amount of magic that happens behind the scenes, like, for instance, in MobX, when you get some object, you register to it, and somehow your app gets rebuilt. I want to have that explicit in my app. And then also, most of my apps are actually glorified REST clients, which means that they always have a loading state if you get to a view. They get some data from a backend and then show it to the user. So having something that handles that automatically for you is really helpful. And the most important part, I think, for any project is that it's consistent. So if you look at one view, you know, if I understand this one, I'll understand the next one. So the high-level architecture is actually quite simple. We have both a stateless part and a stateful part of the app. And the view is, at least mostly, completely stateless. And then all the state will be handled in the model and what I call repositories. And both these can talk to services, and the services, for instance, just a handler that talks to the API. So let's look a bit at how that would be done with a model and a view, because that's the most important parts that you deal with every day. So to handle the state, we actually have two kinds of state. We have a state that will affect the whole view. So for instance, am I loading? Or did the whole list of data change length or something like that? And then we have smaller parts, like, is the button enabled? Or
am I submitting a form and showing a loading indicator somewhere? Or even a very simple number next to a shopping cart with how many items you got in it. So let's quickly have a look at an example I made for this presentation. I thought, let's not do a counter app again, so I made a simple Hacker News client. You might be familiar with Hacker News. They have a fairly simple API, which for one of the things they give you is a list of top stories and a list of news stories. So in my app, you can see both of these lists, but they're actually on the same page, as we can see. And they are both paginated even. So at the top, we see the top stories with a next page button, and you would expect the news stories to be that as well, but this one is actually an infinite loading screen. And if you pay attention, you see that there are build numbers here. This number will actually increase every time that the list item will rebuild. As you can see, it goes up quite fast, and that's because when it's loading more pages, then it has to rebuild the whole list. So, and now let's go up and let's note the next page of the top stories, and also pay attention to this number of new stories. It's 475. If we reload, get the next page, we see these numbers get higher, but these actually don't change because this view is actually built from two separate views. And as you could also maybe quickly see is that the button turned into a loading indicator while it was loading. Let's have a quick look at the code. It's actually, there is quite a bit of code. On the slide I have a link to the GitHub page where I have the whole code base where you can take a look if you want. But the basis for the view is that I have a class view with a model, and giving this type will get the model for the view and then handle automatically the loading state. So in this model, I handle loading the data and making sure that the view can know whether or not it's loading. And then it has just a few widgets in it that show the view. And then each of these sections also has its own view with a view model, or a model, it's not really a view model, which again has a loading state, but they don't have their own loaders because the whole page loads as one. For instance, if we pull to refresh the whole page, then we'll see it loads as one. And then finally, we have the new style. And this style also has its own view with its own model. And it actually has one special thing, and that is you can like them. And if you press like, you can see that the build doesn't go up. So it's not the whole thing that rebuilds, just this button. And that's done with using a value notifier in the new style that we listen to with value listener builders. And that way, whenever I have a small part of that I need to rebuild, sometimes I can use a value listener builder and simply control what gets rebuilt. So I'm running out of time, so let's go to the last slide. Thanks for listening. If you want to get into contact with me, just email me or send me a message on Slack. And if you feel free to check out my GitHub content. Thank you.
Yes. Last but not least, so some questions. Well, actually, I've recorded one, apart from Rogier mentioning, what do you say again, Rogier? Understanding the code is a great argument. Yeah, that's truly correct. So Rogier is asking, if you would, in this setup, output all changes in streams, wouldn't it be then just be BLoC again?
I guess yes and no, because having streams also introduces asynchronicity in all of your code. And this way it's completely synchronous. So that's the main difference. But in essence, the high-level idea is quite similar, yes.
Okay, great. And then Stefan is asking, I didn't have time to copy paste it, but is the project open sourced? So can other people take a look at it or use it? Or?
Yeah, so the one I just showed you is, you can find it on this link. It's open source, MIT license, so feel free to use anything. It doesn't have any tests yet, but if people are interested, I'm willing to add those as well. Because I usually add those, but didn't manage to do it for this example yet.
Okay.
Yes, I have to unmute my mic again. Okay, thanks very much, Peter. So you were the last one. I'll just put up the live chat again. If there are any questions, there are no questions. So maybe we can just have like a group discussion about a couple of topics. Oh, well, first of all, we had like a little poll, so who's using what? So BLoC is used the most, then Provider. I believe at Google I/O last year, Provider was like pitched as the go-to solution for state management by Google itself, so maybe that's also why it's so popular, and it's a wrapper around inherited widget and stuff, so keep it simple, I guess. Then standard Dart and Flutter components, so like Peter was showing, and then something else, or just using stateful widgets. I don't know. Redux is not used that much, but 11%, and MobX also a couple people. So BLoC is by far the most popular in this small poll we had. Then maybe a question. So why are there so many state management solutions, and why do we need more? So just recently the guy from Provider created another iteration of his package. It's called Riverpod. It's an anagram of Provider. Felix Angelov extracted the core of Flutter BLoC into Flutter Qubit, also looking very promising for small state management solutions. And there's also something called Flutter hooks. There's many more state solutions. So maybe a question, so why are there so many state management solutions? Any one of you know why?
I think it was so many state developers.
But we get lights now, I was
Right. So I think it's because there's so many flavors of developers. Everybody has their own favorite structure. The one is the one likes streams a lot, and somebody else gets a bit confused or just thinks it's too generic and wants a bit more specific solution. So that's why, like I said also in my presentation, I don't think there's one state management solution that is really the best, and it's more about what suits you as a developer. What are you comfortable with? Like maybe Redux is very familiar for React developers, while MVVM kind of solution is easier for Xamarin or Microsoft and maybe Android. And myself, I like BLoC because of the streams and to easily update my UI in real time.
Yeah, and are all solutions, so Reed, I know BLoC because we use BLoC by ourselves, so isn't it also a question, can you unit test the thing? Can you unit test your business logic? Is that also one of the reasons for you guys?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, unit tests are important, and I think with both Redux and BLoC and Peter's own solution, you can create unit tests, and that's important to do.
I think in general with Flutter it's really easy because even if you don't have one of these solutions, you can even unit test your whole app with Flutter without having any UI rendered. I think that's really powerful for Flutter.
And isn't it also so because Flutter is still relatively new? You know, it's a couple of years old. So, but the adoption from last year to now has been huge, right? So, isn't it also people are just trying to find a good solution, or Google is not providing one themselves in the SDK? Does that also influence the amount of state management solutions out there?
Oh, I think so. You see, like you see with Redux. Yeah, with Redux, for example, it's clearly taken, yeah, sort of copied or implemented from the React world to make those. Yeah, that's what people are familiar with. They get curious about Flutter. They see the potential, but they don't want to leave their state management solution. So they port it to Flutter, and I think a lot of people do. The provider, for example, I think is completely new and just makes use of the inherited widgets framework and tries to make it easier for people to make use of Flutter's own mechanism, for example, and BLoC uses the power of streams that are built in to Dart. And yeah, so I think that, yeah, that definitely plays a role, that Flutter is new and yeah.
It's also like that famous XKCD strip, of course, that there are 14 known ways to solve something, and then somebody thinks of a better solution, and now there are 15 ways to solve something.
Yeah.
That will always be the case for whatever you do. So we will not have the end of state management inside. I think even Remy is now posting river path. So
yeah.
Let's see what it will be.
Yeah, and the qubit on the BLoC side is just yeah, even easier way to use BLoC basically, but it's all the same in the engine. It's just, yeah. You see it's maturing now. It's growing up, and that's really nice to see.
Okay, great. So another question: if state is whatever data you need in order to rebuild your UI at any moment in time, how do you guys recover from your app being killed by the operating system in the background? It's a known issue, I know, but you know, it's also state. So, are you familiar with the problem?
Yeah, me coming from the Android world, I've been an Android developer for 8 years, I think, before I discovered Flutter. Of course, this is a known issue with state that your app being killed in the background. What you could do with Redux, for example, but I guess also with other state solutions, is just every time something changes, every few seconds, or every big change, you can save the whole app state to your local storage. So you can persist your app state, and then the next time you start the app, you can read that back, of course, and then use that. I also noticed that someone in the Android community, Hugo, has built a Flutter package, which also hooks into the Android and iOS native side to know when your app gets killed, and then I guess also save the state.
Yeah, I believe it was even that event was even in Flutter itself, but they removed it because no one used it, I think.
Yeah, I also saw some documents that they are doubting about bringing it back then.
Yeah.
At least there are some discussions going on, some documents are going on in Flutter to improve this situation, because I think it's becoming bigger and bigger of an issue with operating systems like Android and iOS that are killing apps in the background to save battery in the end.
Especially as iOS is notorious for it.
Yeah, I think the whole Asian Android market also with the low battery, the low RAM and the low battery.
And on BLoC, Felix Angelov made a nice plugin that hooks into the, works closely together with his other plugins that will automatically manage saving the state for you if your app dies. I think it's called hibernating BLoC or something. I'm not sure, but I thought that was it. So that might be interesting to have a look. It's open source.
I think it was hydrated.
Oh, hydrated. Yeah, hydrated.
But in general, for most apps, it's actually not an issue because the state is just built as you fire up the app. If it gets killed, the user starts from your first screen. But they know that happens.
Yeah, something else might be the single source of truth, like a backend or
exactly
an IoT device.
Mute my mic. Yes, my mic's unmuted. So I'll just go to the live chat. So thanks to all the presenters. Nice talks. So thank you guys again. So from everybody watching. Yes. Thanks. Let's see. So Sebastian also said, any suggestions for a transient UI state management solution to restore UI when the app is killed in the background? So basically we talked about that, Sebas. So that's take a look at Hugo's plugin. I can't remember what is called again. We'll send you the link, or we'll put it in the notes or something. Thanks. I have a dry mouth. I can't pronounce the S anymore. Yes, well done. Okay. Well, I think, guys, we pulled through, including Murphy's Law. So I think, we'd like to thank you, of course, for spending time with us. So please give us feedback either here in the chat or in Slack. We'll just put the QR code for our Slack group in a minute. So thanks very much for watching. So I'll just shut up for one minute. No, we're in Amersfoort. There's been bells ringing the whole live stream. Maybe you heard them or not. Anyway, it's a nice location. We'll have a beer here. I hope to have a beer with you whenever we can meet again. So until then, I say goodbye and see you next time.